Hey there. Today, we're diving into the psychology of fairness at work. We're going to look at why it's such a big deal and what's actually going on in our heads when things feel, well, just not right. Let's jump in.
I mean, we've all been there, right? That little nagging feeling that the scales just aren't balanced. You're putting in the work, you're doing what you're supposed to do, but something feels off. Well, that feeling, it's not just in your head. It is actually the core of a really powerful theory about what motivates us. So let's rewind to 1963. A behavioral psychologist named John Stacey Adams came up with this thing called equity theory. He argued that what really drives us isn't just about our own goals. It's about this deep, almost primal need we have for fairness. And the way we figure out if things are fair, we look around and compare ourselves to other people. And that is the absolute key to this whole thing. It's not about the size of your paycheck in a vacuum. It's all about how your paycheck stacks up against the person at the next desk or your friend who has a similar job. Fairness, it turns out, is completely relative. So how do we figure this all out? Well, Adam said we're all walking around doing this kind of invisible math in our heads, a personal calculation to figure out if we're getting a fair shake. This right here breaks down that mental math. On one side, you have our inputs, all the stuff we give, our effort, our skills, our loyalty, the hours we put in. And on the other side, you've got the outcomes. That's what we get back. Sure, salary is a big one, but so is recognition, praise, or even just feeling secure in your job. We are all keeping a running tally of this, whether we realize it or not. And all of that leads to what he called the equity ratio. The big idea is that we intuitively take our outcomes and divide them by our inputs. Now, this isn't like we're pulling out a calculator. It's more of a gut check, right? It's that feeling of, am I getting a fair return for all the hard work I'm putting in? But here's where it gets really, really fascinating. Figuring out our own ratio, that's just step one. By itself, that number, that feeling, it doesn't mean anything. Its real power comes from what we do next. We compare it. We compare our ratio to what Adams called a referent other. And as you can see, this can be a bunch of different people. Sometimes we compare ourselves to ourselves, like how things were in a past role at the same company. Or we look at a coworker right there in the office. But we also look outside, comparing our situation to an old job at a different company, or, and this is a big one, to a friend who does something similar. Who we pick as our measuring stick completely changes how fair we think things are. So this whole act of comparison pushes us into one of three psychological states. And it's right here that motivation is either supercharged or completely crushed. First, you've got the ideal situation, equity. This is when your outcomes to inputs ratio feels pretty much the same as the person you're comparing yourself to. You feel like things are fair. In this state, you're satisfied, you feel respected, and you're motivated to keep doing a good job. Everything's great. But then there's this one, under-reward inequity. This is when you feel like you're putting in the same amount of work, maybe even more, but you're getting less back than somebody else. This is the real danger zone for motivation. It doesn't just make you want to work less, it actually creates anger, resentment, and a ton of frustration. Now, the third state is kind of a paradox. It's over-reward. This is when you feel like you're getting more than you deserve compared to others. And you might think, hey, that sounds great. But psychologically, it often creates this real discomfort. It can lead to feelings of guilt, or it makes us start to rationalize and justify why we're so much more valuable. So whenever we feel that tension, whether it's from being under-rewarded or even over-rewarded, our brain immediately starts scrambling to fix it. We are literally hardwired to get things back in balance. So how do we do that? Well, Adams pointed out a few common strategies. One, we might change our inputs, just decide to work a little less hard. Or we could try to change our outcomes by marching in and asking for a raise. We also do some pretty wild mental gymnastics, telling ourselves things like, well, I guess I actually work harder than I thought. Or, their job is probably way more stressful. Sometimes we just pick someone new to compare ourselves to. And of course, the last resort, if the imbalance is just too much to handle, we leave, we quit. Okay, so this is all fascinating psychology, right? But how can a manager or a leader actually use any of this? Because this isn't just theory. It's a super practical tool for building a team that actually wants to be there. You have to realize what a huge leap this was. The old way of thinking, like Taylorism, basically saw money as a simple button you push. Pay people more, they work harder. Simple. But what Adam showed us is that money is more of a symbol. A $50,000 salary can feel like a king's ransom or a total insult, and it all depends on what the people around you are making. So for any leader, here's the bottom line. Be transparent. You have to explain the why behind your decisions on pay and promotions. Make sure your systems have a clear logic. And maybe most important of all, you have to remember that perception is reality. It doesn't matter if you think you're being fair. If your employee feels like it's unfair, that feeling is real, and the demotivation that comes with it is also very, very real. J. Stacey Adams himself really just summed it all up perfectly with this quote. It's the tension that unfairness creates that pushes us to act.
And the bigger that perceived gap is, the more powerful our need to fix it becomes, one way or another. So I'll just leave you with this question. This whole invisible calculation, this personal math, it's happening in your head all the time, whether you think about it or not. The only real question is, who is your referent other? Because figuring that out might just explain a whole lot about how you feel at work tomorrow.